The National Desk, America's News, now.
Americans have the right to peacefully protest. And they have the right to peacefully protest as long as it's within the law and that it's peaceful. Forcibly taking over a building is not peaceful.
Arrests around the country as more protests and counter-protests break down into violence. What some lawmakers are trying to do in response and why others are pushing back. Vice President Kamala Harris is in Florida as their 6-week abortion ban takes effect. This as Arizona walks back its strict abortion policy. Just ahead, the very latest in the fight for and against reproductive rights. And another night of severe weather alerts as the middle of the country is still reeling from a series of tornadoes since the weekend. Where the threats are tonight. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Amira David. Right now, police stationed on the campuses of Columbia University and UCLA a day after law enforcement were called upon to restore order when pro-Palestinian protests against the war in Gaza escalated. At Columbia, over 100 protesters arrested and an encampment cleared out after a group of protesters broke into and barricaded themselves inside a university building, defying a university deadline to pack up and leave. This exactly 2 weeks after its Gaza solidarity protest first began and then sparked a wave of campus demonstrations across the country and globally. New York City Mayor Eric Adams said this morning that while some students were involved in the occupying of the school building, they were led by individuals not affiliated with the university.
It was about external actors hijacking peaceful protests and influenced students to escalate.
At UCLA, the LAPD were called in overnight to break up clashes after a group of pro-Israeli counter-protesters allegedly hurled fireworks and other items into the pro-Palestinian encampment. Here's what one protester told CNN.
Boards, bricks, fireworks, not firecrackers, fireworks were shot directly at students and exploded at ground level inside the encampment.
Classes on the LA campus today canceled. This as college protests continued with fervor across the country, calling for their universities to cut ties with Israel, including at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, with a tense standoff today between police and protesters. Police there detaining at least 2 professors, one of them visibly injured in the process. And on Capitol Hill, House lawmakers overwhelmingly voting on a bill that would require the Education Department to adopt a broader definition of anti-Semitism to include targeting the state of Israel. The bipartisan vote was 320 to 91 with 18 no votes. Advocates for the bill say it's needed to protect Jewish students, to provide clarity for the agencies that enforce the law, while others have argued the bill threatens to chill constitutionally protected speech and will be weaponized against Israel's critics. The Mount Orab Middle School outside of Madison, Wisconsin, was placed on lockdown today following threats of an active shooter on school grounds. Police say the threat was neutralized before the would-be assailant entered the school. There are no reports of anyone being harmed except the suspect. And the investigation of the massive shootout in Charlotte, North Carolina that left 4 law enforcement officers and the main suspect dead continues. 3 of the other 4 officers shot have been released from the hospital. The 4th is recovering from surgery and is in stable condition. 2 women, 1 adult and 1 17-year-old minor were taken into custody on Monday, but have not yet been arrested. They have been working with the investigation. They told officers they were in the house voluntarily, but have not disclosed their relationship to the suspect, named Clark Hughes Jr. During the shootout, 12 officers fired at the suspects as they took cover. They are all on paid leave as the investigation continues. Florida's 6-week abortion ban is now in effect. It comes after the state Supreme Court ruled the right to privacy in Florida's Constitution does not protect abortion access. Florida was one of the last southern states to severely restrict abortion after Roe v. Wade was overturned. Anyone seeking an abortion there after 6 weeks will need 2 doctors to confirm that it's medically necessary. Vice President Kamala Harris was in Jacksonville today speaking about the issue.
Now, present day, because of Donald Trump, more than 20 states have abortion bans. More than 20 Trump abortion bans.
And here's a live look over Phoenix, Arizona, where earlier today the state Senate passed the repeal of the near-complete abortion ban enacted in 1864. Governor Katie Hobbs said she would sign the bill into law when it makes it to her desk. But for now, abortion will remain banned. Arizona law doesn't allow repeals to go into effect until 90 days after the legislative session ends. Last year's session ended in July on a similar end date that would keep the abortion ban on the books until late October or even mid-November. In South Dakota, voters appear to have enough signatures to place a constitutional abortion amendment vote on the ballot in November. The amendment, if enacted, would guarantee legal abortions in all situations in the first trimester of a pregnancy. The state would be allowed to regulate abortions in the second trimester, but must make allowances for the physical health of the would-be mother. Prohibition in the third trimester would be allowed except to preserve the life of the health of the mother. Former Biden administration officials were summoned to Capitol Hill to testify in a House GOP-led hearing examining the pressure they put on tech companies like Facebook to censor online content that questioned or went against the White House's messaging on the pandemic. Here's national correspondent Kayla Gaskins with more.
Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury?
Most of the GOP's evidence presented in Wednesday's hearing came from internal Facebook company emails obtained through a congressional subpoena.
Can we include that the White House put pressure on us to censor the lab leak theory? That's the question Mark Zuckerberg asked in a group text with the top people at Facebook.
The former administration officials defending their actions.
To be sure, those companies are the ultimate decision makers about what goes on their platform. But that does not mean that communication staff cannot ask or even implore those companies to address misinformation on their platforms.
The requests from the White House included suppressing online discussions surrounding vaccine safety and efficacy.
Congressman, again, we were communicating the best medical research that we had at the time.
Meanwhile, AstraZeneca, a British pharmaceutical company, faces mounting lawsuits for side effects from their COVID vaccine. The company recently admitted the vaccine can cause a rare but deadly blood clotting condition known as TTS.
There has to be protection for those people who did the right thing when the government said it was safe and effective, time and time again.
AstraZeneca was not approved by the CDC for distribution in America, but it does raise questions about how much COVID-19 vaccine developers know and don't know about the products developed in rapid, stressful circumstances and the dangers of attempting to censor and shut down medical debate.
The powers that be went with the party line. At least in the U.S., a lot of these manufacturers are really kind of shielded from a lot of culpability, mainly because the government was such in a hurry to get these things out there.
The United Methodist Church overturns its long-standing ban on LGBTQ clergy. Delegates voted overwhelmingly today, 692 to 51, to remove the rule. Many conservatives who long upheld the ban have left the denomination in recent years. Delegates are expected to vote on whether marriage can be between two people of faith instead of just a man and a woman before the Legislative General Conference ends on Friday. And Harvey Weinstein, he was back in a New York courtroom today. Prosecutors are hoping to retry him in September. The former movie mogul had his New York felony sex crime conviction overturned last week on appeal. Weinstein had been serving a 23-year sentence in prison. He's also facing 16 years in prison in California, where in 2022 he was convicted of raping an actress. Two people have been detained by police, one who has been charged in connection to an opioid overdose outbreak in Austin, Texas this week. Since Monday, as many as 8 people have died, with 4 deaths confirmed from more than 50 overdoses across the city. Emergency medical services say they usually see 2 or 3 calls a day, making this more than 1,000% increase.
It is apparent that there is a deadly batch of illicit narcotics in our community. Our intent at the Austin Police Department is to find those persons responsible and hold them accountable.
More charges and arrests are expected as the investigation continues. Those charges could range from possession of delivery or of a controlled substance all the way up to murder. And coming up, tens of millions of people are getting hit with severe weather today, where hail and tornadoes are forecast. Then high inflation keeping interest rates high as well, likely throughout the summer. New insights from the Federal Reserve on where prices are headed. Plus, what mail carriers are now demanding as the country continues to see an uptick in assaults on these workers. We'll be right back. And here's a live look at Austin, Texas, as more than 30 million people from Texas to Nebraska, as well as Missouri and Illinois, have been in the path for severe weather today. Right now, we're watching storms headed towards Houston, the area south of Omaha, and also St. Louis. The biggest threat today could be very large hail between the sizes of golf balls and baseballs. And, of course, there is a possibility of some tornadoes. This as parts of the Midwest are still reeling from tornadoes yesterday and over the weekend. 1 person died last night and 22 homes were destroyed following a tornado in Westmoreland, Kansas. 3 others were treated for non-life-threatening injuries. The Federal Reserve announced today that it will hold interest rates right where they are until there's proof inflation is on its way to that 2% target. National correspondent Atral Nashar has more on this from Washington.
The Federal Reserve's decision to once again leave interest rates unchanged came as no surprise given the recent series of hotter than expected inflation reports. The gauge the Fed watches closest shows inflation at 2.8%, so still a ways off from their ideal 2% rate. Now, unlike the Fed's last announcement, this time they said that there is a lack of progress toward that goal. At the same time, the Fed notes that economic activity continues to expand at a solid pace, thanks in large part to robust consumer spending.
We're committed to retaining our current restrictive stance of policy for as long as is appropriate. Likely to take longer for us to gained confidence that we are on a sustainable path down to 2% inflation.
Chair Powell said it's unlikely that their next move will be to raise rates, so it's really a question of how long the Fed keeps rates this high, and that's impacting credit cards and anyone looking to buy a home or a car. The Fed's next meeting kicks off June 11th. In Washington, I'm Atrell Nashar for the National Desk, America's News Now.
Atra, thank you. After more than 200 days of war, with thousands of lives lost, more than 1 million Gazans homeless, and more than 100 hostages still in Hamas captivity, Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Israel for his 7th time since war broke out, turning up the pressure on Hamas to accept a recently offered truce deal.
There is no time for delay. There's no time for further haggling. The deal is there. They should take it.
The proposal includes a 40-day truce in return for the release of about 36 hostages and the prospect that displaced families would be allowed back into northern Gaza. While there, Blinken also met with some families of Israeli hostages held in Gaza who were protesting outside after his meeting with the president. Here's a part of what he told them.
Bringing your loved ones home is at the heart of everything we're trying to do. And we will not rest until everyone, man, woman, soldier, civilian, young, old, is back home.
Former President Donald Trump campaigning today on an off day of his hush money trial. On the schedule are rallies in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and then Freeland, Michigan, his first events in swing states since the trial began last month. Trump won these states in 2016, but lost them in 2020. He will be back in court in New York City tomorrow. Gas prices are finally starting to level off after months of increases. The national average has actually fallen just a bit from $3.68 per gallon last week to $3.66 on Monday. That's according to AAA. It's much lower than June of 2022's average, above $5 a gallon. An analyst at Gas Buddy says the chances that prices are at their spring peak are increasing. 12% of LGBTQ young people attempted suicide last year, and more than a third considered it. That's according to a new survey from the Trevor Project of Americans ages 13 to 24. It also found that half of LGBTQ youth who wanted mental health care were not able to get it. The organization said bullying and politics were major factors in the suicide risks. The government is investigating the tech company Block over transactions in two of its platforms, Cash App and Square. Prosecutors are talking to a former employee who claims thousands of transactions were processed involving economically sanctioned countries or terrorist groups exchanging cryptocurrency. Block responded saying the firm has, quote, an extensive compliance program. Johnson & Johnson proceeding with a near $6.5 billion proposed settlement of tens of thousands of lawsuits claiming that their baby powder and other talc products contain asbestos and may have caused ovarian cancer. The company will now open a 3-month voting process to agree to the terms. Courts had rejected Johnson & Johnson in its last 2 attempts to settle the claims. The company still denies their powders had asbestos or caused any cancer. The CDC has issued a warning about E. coli poisoning linked to organic walnuts sold in 19 states. The nuts were sold in natural food and co-op stores such as Whole Foods and Market of Choice. At least 12 people have become ill in California and Washington. The FDA has linked the contaminated batches to Gibson Farms Incorporated in Hollister, California. The potentially affected walnuts have expiration dates between May 21st, 2025 and June 7th of 2025. New technology used in medical forensics is helping victims of domestic violence. Medical reporter Liz Bonas shares the story of one woman who says what she saw turned her life around.
Hey there, everybody. Hello to you. This brave young woman, her name is Justice, seen here with her 10-month-old daughter, Nova, says a trip to the emergency room finally got her to take the first steps of a courageous journey to end a violent relationship.
It was a bad morning. He started to strangle me and tried to throw me around the house.
Eventually, Justice ended up here, in front of this camera called the Cortex Flow in the emergency department at Tri-Health's Good Samaritan Hospital.
The camera made me realize that, because I used to downplay it. I didn't think that what he was doing to me was that bad because I couldn't see anything, and then I seen it, and I had a breakdown.
The Cortex Flow is a camera designed for photos used in forensic medical examinations.
The Cortex Flow camera captures things that most cameras miss, especially in terms of strangulation, which is huge.
Once contrast is applied, forensic nurse Christine Hassert can see a photo, such as this one from Justice's neck, go from this to this. You can see the injury beneath the skin. That day gave Justice the courage to take legal action and get out of her relationship for good.
I feel like in that moment, it just validated her, and I just think that's what everybody deserves in that moment.
You see, Justice was pregnant with Nova at the time.
I was 25 or 26 weeks.
She says seeing what she saw here made her want to save Nova's life and her own.
I love her. She saved me.
The team here says that's the purpose of these pictures.
It's really impactful to see how people's lives can turn around.
And there's a lot of resources that are out there that maybe a lot of victims may not know about. So a big goal for us is to make sure that we as nurses and our team can help advocate for these women who, are having what could be the worst day of their life.
And speaking of advocates for women who may be in similar situations, here's what Justice wants you to know.
I want them to know that they're not in this alone. There's 100, maybe millions of other women that are going through something 10 times as worse or just as bad as you, and you don't have to sit. You don't have to settle.
It's been 3 years since a bombshell report drew attention to toxic metals in baby food. What progress has been made since then? Right after this. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering the issues that matter most to you. We're taking the pulse of America.
In a matter of 2 days, a neighborhood park in the Central District dotted with dozens of tents and more than 200 people, including families, all refugees seeking asylum and seeking a new life. Don Tati said he and his pregnant wife and their 3 kids fled Congo in Central Africa.
The realities are not good. And we know that as we come here, we feel more better. And there is hope for future.
He's one of the few people who speak English in the camp. He says they picked Seattle and this park, and they think it's safe, and they think the city will help them.
We're going to be just here. No matter how many days we're going to spend, we'll just be here.
The city said it visited the park Monday. It's not safe to live in a park, and this requires a state response. But it's working with public and private partners to find resources. The city has already helped pay for hotel stays and says it's exhausted such allocated funding.
It's been 3 years since a bombshell congressional report called out the top baby food makers for dangerous levels of lead, arsenic, cadmium, and mercury in their products. Back then, the FDA created a program called Closer to Zero that was supposed to deliver strict limits to protect kids. But the timeline set by the agency that once promised concrete action by this year have been abandoned.
I want to throw up here a screenshot of your website from today. So in terms of when, for instance, arsenic in baby food would be examined, no update.
Dozens of mail carriers from the Baltimore area gathered downtown on Tuesday, concerned for their safety. Union leaders say since 2020, there have been 2,000 cases reported across the country of mail carriers being assaulted and robbed.
They're out there doing their jobs, and people out there pulling guns on them, taking the mail equipment, taking the mail, the parcels, the packages, and we're fed up. Enough is enough.
The carriers are demanding action from federal officials. Union leaders say legislation is pending in Congress that would stiffen penalties for offenders. It wasn't clear where a mysterious near-Earth asteroid came from, but now scientists believe they know. We'll explain coming up. An international team of scientists may have solved a cosmic mystery, the origin of an asteroid traveling near Earth. It was discovered in 2016 and comes within 9 million miles of our planet. Previous research indicated it came from the moon's surface, but a new study estimates that it probably came from the Giordano Bruno crater on the far side of the moon. The lead author says it's the first time a possibly dangerous near-Earth asteroid has been linked to a specific lunar crater. And that does it for this edition of the National Desk. We invite you to join us again this evening. I'm Amira David. Thank you so much for watching.